Module Overview. Agribusiness enterprises rely heavily on human labor across every stage of production, from planting and harvesting to processing, packaging, distribution, and retail. However, labor practices in the agricultural sector have often been characterized by informality, seasonal employment, child labor, unsafe working conditions, and insufficient access to legal protection. As global supply chains demand higher ethical standards and government institutions strengthen labor regulations, agribusinesses must align with national and international labor laws to ensure compliance, sustainability, and competitiveness. This module explores the complex intersection of labor rights, employment contracts, occupational safety, wage laws, and labor union regulations as they apply specifically to the agricultural industry. It covers both formal and informal labor frameworks, the unique legal status of seasonal and migrant workers, and the rights and responsibilities of employers and employees in agribusiness. Furthermore, the module dissects international labor standards from the International Labor Organization ILO and the implications of domestic labor laws on recruitment, dismissal, working conditions, and grievance procedures. It also discusses the rise of corporate social responsibility, fair trade certifications, and ethical sourcing policies as tools for enforcing labor standards in global agribusiness markets. Learning objectives. By the end of this module, you will be able to understand the key provisions of labor laws affecting agribusiness. Identify legal obligations of agribusiness employers and rights of agricultural workers. Analyze labor classifications. Permanent, seasonal, casual, migrant, and contract workers. Examine the role of employment contracts, collective bargaining, and labor unions. Understand wage regulation, working hours, and occupational health and safety requirements. Evaluate gender equality, youth employment, and anti discrimination protections. Navigate enforcement mechanisms, penalties, and dispute resolution in labor law. Interpret international labor standards and their integration into agribusiness supply chains. Foundations of agricultural labor law. Importance of labor regulation in promoting decent work, safety, and equity in agriculture. Duality of formal and informal labor structures in agribusiness. Types of agricultural workers and employment status. Key principles of labor law, minimum wage, non discrimination, health and safety, rest, and unionization. Permanent workers, full time employees with benefits and job security. Seasonal workers, hired for planting/harvest seasons, limited job stability. Casual workers, irregular, task based laborers with fewer legal protections. Migrant workers, workers crossing internal or international borders, often vulnerable to exploitation. Contract laborers, hired through intermediaries, regulated under labor contractor laws. Employment contracts and legal documentation. Importance of written contracts to define employment terms, duration, wages, roles, rights, fixed term versus indefinite contracts, legal provisions on contract termination, severance, and renewal, statutory requirements for maintaining employment records, minimum wage, work hours, and leave entitlements, national minimum wage laws and agricultural sector wage boards, standard workday and overtime compensation laws, legal entitlements to rest periods, maternity/paternity leave, sick leave, and public holidays, deductions, bonuses, and payment timelines. Occupational health and safety, OHS, in agribusiness. Hazards in agricultural work, machinery, chemicals, sun exposure, animal contact, and fatigue. OHS legal frameworks, protective gear, hazard reporting, emergency procedures, employer duties, safety training, insurance coverage, compliance inspections, worker rights, refusal to work in unsafe conditions, reporting abuse or risks. Prohibition of child labor and forced labor. Legal minimum working age in agriculture, exceptions for family farms. Distinction between child labor and acceptable youth work. Forced labor indicators, debt bondage, withheld wages, document confiscation. International conventions, ILO conventions number 138, minimum age, and 182, worst forms of child labor. Anti-discrimination and gender equity in agricultural employment. Legal protections against discrimination on the basis of sex, race, religion, or disability. Gender-specific rights, Equal pay for equal work, maternity protections, sexual harassment laws, challenges faced by women agricultural workers, and legal remedies. Labor unions, collective bargaining, and worker associations. Legal rights to organize, unionize, and bargain collectively. Role of cooperatives and rural workers associations. Strike laws and dispute resolution procedures. Employer obligations during industrial actions. Grievance mechanisms and labor dispute resolution. Internal grievance redress procedures. Role of labor courts, tribunals, and ombudsmen. Arbitration, conciliation, and mediation processes. Penalties for employer noncompliance. Fines, jail terms, blacklisting, revocation of licenses. International labor standards and ethical supply chains. ILO core labor standards, freedom of association, elimination of forced and child labor, non discrimination, voluntary compliance through certifications, fair trade, Rainforest Alliance, Ethical Trading Initiative ETI, corporate social responsibility CSR audits and supply chain due diligence, legal requirements for labor transparency in supply contracts, e.g., EU Supply Chain Law, UK Modern Slavery Act. Key takeaways. Labor laws protect the dignity, health, and rights of workers in the agribusiness sector. Employers must adhere to legal standards regarding wages, safety, equality, and employment terms. Informal labor is common in agriculture, but increasingly subject to legal reform. Compliance with international labor standards enhances agribusiness reputation and market access. Effective grievance mechanisms and transparent employment practices reduce risk and boost productivity.